1-800-357-0910 is our number throughout the show. But with us this morning to start the show off is James Paul, who's a senior policy analyst at the Commonwealth Foundation. And this week is National School Choice Week. And James joins us this morning here on the Gary Sutton Show. Hey, James, good to have you back on the show. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary. You staying warm out there?
As much as humanly possible, okay?
I hear you.
One of the things I've learned to do is to go near places where they have fire, and it really helps me to kind of stay warmer, instead of kind of going back to the Middle Ages. But, I'm trying to, if that answers the question. Hey, good to have you with us this morning. National School Choice Week. Matt and I have had, Matt Briette, your bosses, and I've had a lot of interesting discussions on this over the years. And how would you, if you look at National School Choice Week in Pennsylvania, for a lot of people that aren't always on this topic, that it's not foremost in the front of their minds, how would you sum up the state of school choice in Pennsylvania right now?
Great question, Gary. I would say that in many respects, Pennsylvania is a leader or a pioneer in school choice. We have over approximately 175 charter schools, predominantly in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. We have 2 tax credit scholarship programs, which allow students to receive scholarships to attend schools of choice as opposed to their district school, which they're usually forced to attend based only on their zip code. We have a number of other policies which are very good. So I would say the state of choice is strong, but as always, it could be better. And as we recognize and celebrate National School Choice Week, I think this is a good opportunity to say, we're doing pretty well, but there are a number of things we can do to ensure that each child and family has even greater opportunities.
James, as I watch the face of public education, and I was involved in it for a long time, for 25 years as a teacher. But as I watch the face of public education right now, I see it changing radically. And I wonder if our commitment by community is the same as it was, it all got started with the Puritans many, many years ago. Do we still have the same commitment? Is it still incumbent upon the community to provide public education for all of our students, or is it more incumbent upon the parent now? Or have we found some hybrid in between? Your thoughts on that?
I think what we're seeing is that increasingly parents and families are dissatisfied with the service that they're being offered in their local public school. And of course, this isn't always the case. There are a number of great public schools, and there are a number of great public school teachers. But you have a number of you have forces at work, primarily teachers' unions and other government unions that seem to exist more to kind of perpetuate their own existence and to serve as interest groups for the adults as opposed to actually serving the children. And when that happens, you see the quality of education begins to suffer. You need look no further than the fact that, we continue to spend more and more dollars on education, but test results are flat. SAT scores are flat. Standardized tests are flat. And it seems like the only answer that a lot of the status quo forces have is to spend more money, and that's just not acceptable for a lot of parents who are, as you mentioned, starting to become much more involved and taking it upon themselves to either homeschool, find a private school that better suits their child's need, or look into charter schools.
The reason I ask that question, James, is because I look at a lot of the stuff right now on school choice and other things, and I think to myself, have we given up on public education? I mean, have we given up on a lot of the public education? We can't fix it. We don't seem to have the guts or the intestinal fortitude to go talk about it in real terms, in terms of what's not happening in families many times, who, in my opinion, should be the primary educators. We don't have the chutzpah to do that, and so what we do is we say, okay, well, let's give them the choice to go somewhere else. I'm looking at it a little less glamorous way than you probably would want me to on that, but, that's one of the things that comes to mind here, that we kind of throw up our hands and we say, okay, we'll litter the countryside with buildings that aren't working. We'll strip out the kids from those to go to other schools, and eventually those buildings will go to sleep and they'll lock the doors. So, how do you address something like that? Because that certainly is a concern out there for a lot of people who are left behind.
Yeah, Gary, you make some good points, and I definitely get where you're coming from. But you're right that I see it a little differently. So I agree that kind of the quality of the product that's being offered now is not acceptable. But when I see private schools opening or innovative charter schools opening up, or you hear about the success of a lot of homeschool families that are happening across Pennsylvania and across the country, I see that as not, well, we're throwing our hands and giving up, but we're embracing a new model that's going to do two things. One, it's going to introduce accountability into the system and really give parents and families more options. And I think you'd agree with me that more choice is always better than having one or no choice.
Well, and I know the Commonwealth Foundation, one of the things you talk about a lot is individual choice, and I certainly am in favor of that. I think individual choice will breed more competition, and I think more competition will breed better quality. Here's where I think your argument falls a little bit short, and maybe you can help me with this. That we all decided many years ago that the idea was we would pay property taxes to support education in our community. We all thought that was a pretty valuable thing. So now, if you are going to have the money follow the student, okay, what happens to the whole tax structure? Does that change? Is there an effort to make that change right now? Is there an effort to change the way we're doing things? Because this certainly does change the way that we're doing things, and it seems to me that one of the things we'll have to do is to readjust the tax structure and the way we do things, not only here in the state of Pennsylvania, but around the country.
Well, it's true that if we actually got to a system where the funding would follow the child, it might require that we, kind of retinker a little bit with the funding.
I don't think there's a might to it. I think you would have to do that. I don't think there's any might about it. Because you have to say, or you could say the money follows me here and we keep the same system, but then obviously you're going to drown the system behind it, and the education for those who are left behind gets even worse.
Well, here's why I don't think that's the case, Gary, and I think the key thing to remember is that even if we got to what I would view as an ideal system where, government provided a set amount of money that would be given to parents and families, and they could decide essentially where that money is spent, where the best place to educate their children is. Even if we got to that point, I would guess that most families are still going to choose the traditional public school model. Of course, this is primarily conjecture on my part because I can't see the future.
No, I understand.
Sure, but I imagine most would. But what you would have is you'd have a situation where innovative schools are given more leeway to open up and offer new products that might take off or might not do well. And then alongside that, you'd have a traditional public school system that would really have to compete and innovate itself in order to survive. And it would get to the point where we're actually funding a student's education as opposed to what we're doing now, which is just funding a system. And I don't think that's the right way we should be looking at things.
No, and listen, I'm not opposed to school choice. I want you to understand what my purpose is I want to go into the deep side of it and say, okay, and here have all the dots been dotted, have all the T's been crossed, and have all the sentences been connected here. And I don't think they have. And I think that's one of the problems. Nice concept, okay, really nice concept. And I know it's the in vogue thing for all Republicans and conservatives around the country to jump onto. I just don't jump onto it that easily because I've been inside education. I know how it works. My master's is in educational administration. So, when I sit back and look at all this, I say, hang on for a second here, because what I've seen in education so much over the years that has troubled me a lot is this idea, we'll throw it against the wall, see if this works. If this doesn't work, we'll throw something else against the wall. And we don't think an awful lot sometimes about the intended and unintended consequences. So what are obviously I know the intended consequences is to make the educational system better for those people who are in substandard educational systems. And I'm not for any moment condoning those. And yet at the same time, I do believe there are unintended consequences and maybe some that are intended. Maybe the idea is to take those schools out of existence. But then what happens to those kids that don't have school choice? We're not at that point yet. They get put into someplace else where they don't really have a choice. And I wonder about how we deal with that.
But that's exactly why we need to have more opportunity. We need to get to a point where there is no child left who doesn't have a choice. At the very least, every family should have that opportunity. And I'll tell you also, Gary, that if you look at some of the really high-performing charter schools in Philadelphia, for example, that serve a predominantly low-income, predominantly minority population that are achieving some of the best results in the city. And if you talk to those kids and those families and said to them, is school choice real? Is it tangible? Is it improving your life? Or is it just a concept? I guarantee those families, and we're talking, tens of thousands of students between the charter students and the students who get tax credit scholarship programs through Pennsylvania's two tax credit laws. I mean, for these families, this is much more than a concept.
Right.
And the hard work now becomes kind of scaling up these programs to let more people reap the benefits from them.
Listen, I do Pennsylvania State basketball championships every year, and I see these programs out there. And I get a chance to talk to the coaches and the kids a lot of times. Very impressed with a lot of them. Not very impressed with some of them also. And we also see, and this is a very minor side thing, and yet at the same time, we see people switching charter schools depending on who has the best team a lot of times too, which is something else. It's a little bit of a petty kind of thing, but I throw it in there because we see that an awful lot. I want to come back and talk to you more about this because I think there are a lot of good things with school choice. I think no question about it. But for example, here in York, we want to replace with a charter school system. But are the charter schools showing better improvement right now than the public system? And if they're not, why would you go to that? Why wouldn't you find something else? We'll talk about it here on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show. It's National School Choice Week. We're with James Pauls, a senior policy analyst with the Commonwealth Foundation. James, like I said, I think school choice school choice is one of those things that if you ask people, it's like saying, have you stopped kicking your dog yet? I mean, you really can't say you don't like the idea of school choice because conceptually, it's a great idea. But when you look at it and you say, okay, and that's my problem is I'm bothered by all these loose ends many times. And one of the things that I see a lot of times back and forth, I'll see a kid playing for one charter school one year and playing for another one the next year. And, we have the idea of fair play in Pennsylvania with the PIAA governing over a lot of our sports. I know that's not really a major part of education, yet at the same time, fair play is. And so if you have a system here that opens it up for other people to be able to cheat, what does that do?
One thing should be made very clear, and that is that just because a school is a private school or a charter school, whatever the school is, just by nature of being a school of choice, that doesn't make it automatically a better option.
Good point.
But that
very
needs
good
to
point.
be clear.
Yeah.
There's no silver bullet. And a school that isn't performing or is doing kind of shady things as you described, especially one that isn't getting results in the classroom,
right,
they shouldn't be renewed. And that's the great thing about charter schools is that accountability element. That if you're not providing good services, if you're not improving results in the classroom, you shouldn't get your charter renewed. And in many cases that happens. But where we never see that happen, Gary, is in the traditional public school sector,
right,
where we have some of the lowest performing schools. Again, I'll use Philadelphia as an example. You could point to York. You could point to a number of school districts in the Pittsburgh area, really across the state, that continue to produce students who are not prepared to get a job. They're not prepared to go to college. Yet we continue funding these systems at higher and higher levels, and there's just this inherent disconnect between what we're actually doing from a policy perspective and what our ultimate goal is.
There are two other points I wanted to ask you about. One of them is, based on all the things you and I have kind of thrown up in the air here and talked about this morning, what are some policy changes that lawmakers in Harrisburg can really pursue to kind of pull some of this together to improve school choice in the state of Pennsylvania?
I briefly touched on the two tax credit scholarship programs in Pennsylvania. They're called the EITC and the OSTC. And these are really successful programs.
Explain the difference between those two, would you, James? So, because a lot of people aren't really familiar with those. I know what the EITC is. I'm not as familiar with the other one.
Sure. So EITC, Educational Improvement Tax Credit, was launched in 2001, and it's the bigger of the two programs. And essentially what that does is it allows businesses to make donations,
right,
get some tax credits back, and then those private dollars go to families to get scholarships at private schools. The OSTC is very similar, except it's more reserved and more restricted in terms of eligibility. So to be eligible, you have to be in one of the lowest 15% performing public schools. But they're similar in nature. And they're successful programs. There's bipartisan support. But, of course, something that would improve them is to increase the cap on both programs. So right now there's a maximum amount of donations that can be received, and therefore there's a maximum amount of scholarships that can be handed out. So something that lawmakers tend to look at each year is, well, what can we do to make these programs run a little bit more smoothly, and what can we do to increase the cap? So that's one thing.
Right.
And then if I could mention another, in the charter sector, a policy that we at Commonwealth Foundation strongly support would be a new way to authorize charter schools. Right now, local school districts are tasked with approving new charter applications. And you can imagine that there's a real conflict of interest there. The incentives are not aligned correctly to promote better schools, because many school districts will be concerned that a new charter school is going to come in and take away a lot of their students, because in many cases that is what happens when a new innovative charter gets in there. So what needs to happen is, instead of school districts being given this authority to approve new charters, we'd like to see either the state of Pennsylvania or institutions of higher learning, universities, be given the authority to approve charter schools. And especially universities, they have the capacity to do this. They have the expertise and the knowledge. They can say what charter schools deserve a green light to open up their doors and start enrolling students.
You know, in talking with some of the members of boards of education around the area and administrators about this over the years, one of the concerns that we have, too, is, the idea that the money, when it follows, isn't necessarily the amount of money that it takes to educate a child. That some of these charter schools, will call out the amount of money, and yet at the same time, that's not what they're using. So obviously, there's a profit factor in there sometimes. Have you heard some of that kind of chatter at all?
Well, normally when you talk about charter financing, the biggest problem I hear is that what charters are actually doing more with less. So districts send charter schools a payment when one of the district students leaves for a charter.
Right.
And that payment is less than what districts spend per pupil. There are a number of line items that get subtracted out.
Traditionally, what's been happening, but that lately there are more and more charter schools who are saying, oh, well, the average per pupil is what, $13,000, $14,000, something like that. And, where we heard like $8,000 in the past was a traditional savings. Now you have people saying, well, and so, like I say, with anything else here in the state of Pennsylvania government, you get graft and corruption kind of weaving its way in. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I mean, and absolutely, there needs to be a transparency and accountability aspect to the charter sector, and there is one in Pennsylvania. Of course, we would support even more transparency, even more accountability for all public school systems, charter and traditional public schools included. And there was a bill last session that would have done a number of these kind of accountability and transparency measures, as well as looked into new authorizers, potentially university authorizers, as I mentioned a moment ago. It ended up not making much headway in the legislature. There's a chance that could be reintroduced and might get some new legs this time around. But you're right that there needs to be a good accountability element as well.
When I hear the word government anywhere close to education right now, my antennas go up immediately, because government could screw up a free meal. It's just the way it is. And if not, they would make you pay a heck of a lot more for the free meal, I guess is what I'm trying to say. James, always good talking to you. I really appreciate it. Hope you don't mind my little grilling this morning, but I like to make sure we get inside some of these things. And, for a lot of people anymore, we hear ideas and they say, oh, that sounds great. And then all of a sudden we go, oh, wait a second, maybe not so great. And or at least maybe we're missing a few things. And I just want to make sure we fill in the discussion fully. That's all.
Gary, it's always great to talk to you. I've got thick skin. Don't worry about it.
So do I. Thanks, right, James. Have a great day. Appreciate it.
You
Take care.
Well.